As Congress continues to battle over major economic policies like the stimulus package and raising the minimum wage, a new Congressional Budget Office study was conducted that claims that raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 could deliver raises for 27 million workers and lift 900,000 Americans above the poverty threshold. But they say that the policy would cost 1.4 million Americans their jobs over the next 4 years.
So here to discuss those findings, friend of the show, co-host of the Bad Faith podcast, Briahna Joy Gray. Briahna, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you both.
Absolutely. So let's go into a little bit of this Congressional Budget Office projection. They actually projected that the minimum wage would increase the deficit and would have a harmful effect on businesses and the majority of workers. What's your view of that? Because I know it's actually quite controversial, their call whenever it comes to that.
Well, what's really interesting about this issue is that it's not that controversial when it comes to workers. We've seen a number of states pass $15 minimum wages across the country over the last few years. And every single time it's been on a ballot. Most recently in Florida during the general election, it has won overwhelmingly with bipartisan support. I think something like 43% of Republican support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Moreover, when you do see the minimum wage raised to $15, none of the perverse effects that everyone talks about actually end up manifesting. As Pramila Jayapal explained on a call recently, Seattle was one of the first earliest states to implement this policy, and it was subsequently named as the best city for employers, best wages, one of the cities with the least amount of job loss in the course of the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look back to the same argument we were having in 2009, which I'll remind everybody is the last time we had a minimum wage raise, the exact same arguments were trotted out then. If people are really concerned about job growth over the next few years, what they should pay attention to is policies like Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal, which was designed to provide 20 million new jobs, or even Biden's more modest clean energy plan is designed to provide 10 million new jobs. So this isn't an either-or situation. This is a real kind of basic need that needs to be delivered to people who are, in fact, our frontline workers and who need it more than ever in the middle of this pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, we've run some natural experiments on this policy at this point. You point to Seattle. I remember when that was first passed, it was like, oh my God, this is going to be disaster. Businesses are going to flee Seattle, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the sky didn't fall. Now you just have workers who can actually come closer to surviving in that city. And that was quite a while ago that they passed that. So the cost of living has continued to go up to where it is appropriate to have that level across the country. Briahna, what do you make of the political dynamics here? You've had some mixed signals. Obviously, Senator Sanders was really fighting to get $15 minimum wage into the budget reconciliation. That was the sort of one big thing that Joe Biden had promised him when Senator Sanders conceded in his presidential race. Then you had Biden come out and say it's probably not going to be in the reconciliation package. Then you had the Progressive Caucus in the House say we got it into the House reconciliation package. Then Chuck Schumer seemed to make some positive noises. Where do you think we are right now?
Yeah, it is frustrating to feel like you're still playing this tug of war with members of your own party, people who are politically aligned and who have pledged to commit to a basic policy like this. Again, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there is not a state in America where a worker working a full-time minimum wage salary can afford a one-bedroom apartment. One bedroom in their own state. And the average minimum wage worker, despite the fact that some conservatives love to talk about how these are jobs for high schoolers and shouldn't be supporting families, well, the average minimum wage worker, like it or not, is a 35-year-old woman whose income provides about half of their family's household income. So these are salaries that are absolutely needed, not some throwaway teenager salary. And the idea that all Democrats and frankly all Republicans wouldn't be full-throatedly behind a policy like this in the middle of a global pandemic and economic crisis really shocks the conscience.
Well, one of the things I'm curious about is, Joe Biden basically came out and said, I don't think this is going to be a part of it, despite the fact that it seems like they might be able to do it if they wanted to. He essentially neutered the negotiation from the top. I mean, what does that say, considering that was, I believe, we've played the clip here, the only thing that he actually promised Sanders that he would push for whenever he was president?
Yeah, well, this is why it's really important to focus on what Bernie Sanders is focused on, which is the fact that this is absolutely within Joe Biden's purview through reconciliation. although a lot of the conservative press about the CBO score is about how many jobs it will cost, the reality is that the CBO score also proved that this would have an impact on the economy, which makes it a good fit for reconciliation. So for those who want this kind of policy to pass, which is, again, the overwhelming majority of Americans, it has bipartisan support. I think it's important to continue to emphasize that this is something that Joe Biden is choosing not to do for whatever reason, and that if there is an opportunity to apply political pressure and to exploit the overwhelming popularity of the program, this is a moment to do so. And I think both activists and politicians shouldn't shirk away from that responsibility.
And then, Briahna, maybe this is an obvious question, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. Why does this keep happening, where you have things that are really popular, things like healthcare, things like minimum wage increases, things like labor unions, that never seem to, or a wealth tax, all of these things that are so popular, right? Full $2,000 checks, $2,000 a month. All of these are really, really popular policies, and yet none of them happens in Washington, D.C. Why is that?
Well, Crystal, that's the question that keeps me up at night and keeps my blood boiling on Twitter all day. Because the reality is that part of it is that we have a real accountability crisis. We all know that corruption exists. We all know that pay for play exists. But what enables folks to get away with it in large part is the fact that journalists, of course, present company excluded, very rarely apply the kind of pressure they need to these politicians to explain to the public, hey, so what you're telling me is that this is possible through budget reconciliation. What you're telling me is we're in the middle of a global economic crisis. What you're telling me is that you just spent the last year wringing your hands about frontline workers, asking people to come to their front doors and applaud as people who can't stay home, keep the world turning. And now you're trotting out the CEO of fast food restaurants, Carl's Jr. on Fox News, to tell people that the workers don't give enough value to deserve a wage. Well, excuse me, if I think that we could be applying enough pressure to tell folks like this, who are messaging like this and providing cover for our political leaders, that minimum wage workers certainly provide more value to society than the cost of a couple of Happy Meals. And it's unconscionable that we're not already delivering that.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Well said, my friend. Great to see you.
Same here.
Next on Rising, executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen. He joins us to discuss where Biden is missing the mark on stimulus requirements when Rising continues.